Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Wandering Road podcast. I'm your host, Chris, and my co host, Dean, is away at the moment. He'll be joining us a little later on in the show. But joining us for today's show is Mr. Vic Hermanson, the host of the Trailer Trash Terrors podcast, the host of the Paranormal Rundown podcast. He's dangerously delusional, and apparently, he's also the enemy of mankind, according to some. How are you doing today, Vic?
Well, if I can get out of those few delusional moments that I know, the few lucid moments that I have, try to time those for this interview. Because when you're fully delusional, it's kind of hard to get stuff done. And, all that time I spend plotting against mankind.
And for the listeners, there's a little inside joke there. We were talking about interacting. Well, Vic was talking about his interactions with potential guests on the show, and one of them called him an
enemy of mankind. When you first start dealing with people and they call you something like enemy of mankind, you kind of get offended, and then after a while, you just kind of chuckle.
Right.
I mean, okay, you want to if what I do brings me to the level of enemy of mankind, then I want to know what those guys are.
They're probably the Joe Rogan folks. They're the Antichrist.
Well, I'm happy to be on your show, Chris. Like I told you the last time you were part of the rundown, and you were on my show, and you and Dean are serious thinkers, and it's hard to find serious thinkers.
We try to be. We try to be lighthearted too. We try to be serious in the sense that we'll take a topic seriously, but we won't shy away from the fact that, we're kind of goofy in nature as well.
Sure. That's what makes it fun.
Yeah, that's what makes it fun. We'll poke fun at everything and anything. Sometimes we've had to edit stuff out just to not get in trouble, but I'm sure.
Well, let me know if I'm going down a road I shouldn't go.
Oh no, I think we're good to wander here. But I wanted to ask you, Vic. I was thinking about this question when I was trying to compile a list of things to potentially ask you for this show. Is Trailer Trash Terrors, what made you start that?
That's a question that has a lot of different possibilities of places I can go. It's something I've wanted to do for a long time. I've listened to podcasts. I mean, that's been my main gym and mowing the lawn and hiking activity for a long time. If I'm out by myself, I don't really care about listening to music anymore. So I've listened to podcasts. And it's an incredible eco-structure out there. Man, you just name it. Anything you want to have a podcast about, it's out there. And most of them are terrible. Most of them, if you start searching through all the podcasts that have ever been started, they generally fizzle out at about 4 episodes.
Right.
A gob of those. Be a nice name, and you'll listen to them. And you can tell that it was just hey, let's try this, guys. So there's a lot of giggling, and there's a lot of wandering, and there's a lot of, hey, what should we be doing now? And so I listen to those, and I don't mind those. I kind of like the idea that people are trying something new, and they are willing to work through the discomfort. I guess what really started it was JJ, was Southern Demonology.
Okay.
I was, the story is I had not washed the dishes in several days, and I'm looking over there, and I'm thinking, geez, that's a real mess. That's going to take a while to clean up. I don't know if that's ever happened to you or not.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I get it.
That's going to take a while to clean up. Let me see if I can find something new to listen to. So I get up on Apple Podcasts and I type in demon. I think it was demon, maybe demonology. But Southern Demonology comes up, and I said, oh, that's weird. I wonder what Southern Demonology is about. So I start listening to JJ, and I spent the next 2 hours listening to JJ, where he was talking about how he became a Catholic, why he became a Catholic, some of his experiences in Japan, his odd path from rural Tennessee to Harvard, and what he's doing now. So I wrote to him. I wrote him I actually recorded an audio letter to him, and just short audio letter telling him, hey, I think I have something you might want to hear, talking about perfectly possessed people. And he wrote me back. And then one night I couldn't sleep, and I sat down and I typed out the stories I had of perfectly possessed people and sent that to him. So then he asked me to be a guest on his show. The first thing he said to me was, man, the stuff you record sounds a lot better than the stuff I record. And so
I will second that. Your show quality wise sounds a lot better than
and he said, and I said, okay, well, what are you recording with? Well, a snowball, a blue snowball. And I'm thinking, okay, well, that's part of your problem, but not the entire problem. We can get this sounding better. Anyway, we had a good 2-hour interview that night. He made 3 episodes of it. If I do a 2-hour interview, it's just 1 episode. If he does a 2-hour interview, it'll end up being 3-4 episodes. And I just decided, I think I want to try to do this. And man, I don't know if your first podcast went smoothly or if it was kind of a major nightmare, but you've got to do a bunch of different things. First, you've got to figure out, how am I going to record this? What's the software I'm going to use? Which microphone do I want to use? How do I want to set this up? And so I downloaded something that was sort of a, at least temporarily free solution. Most of those, after a couple of weeks, they stopped being free. And so then I decided, okay, I need to really invest in this. And that's when I invested in Audition. But it's just because of the fact that I do have these thoughts. I do have things I'd like to talk about. I've had a lot of very strange experiences. I'm kind of an unusual person in the way that I remember things. Have mostly an eidetic memory, meaning I can go back to something that happened in 1972. And I don't have a vague memory of it. I have a very, very strong, powerful memory of it, of what people said, where they were standing, what they were wearing. It's very visual. And I thought, all right, let's try this. I did the first one, and I sort of enjoyed it. And since then, I've just kept going. There have been times I've been a little bit depressed, or not depressed, but discouraged. But I just kept going, and things have started to kind of catch on a little bit. The reason that I called it Trailer Trash Terrors, frankly, was because I wanted something that nobody else would use. I wanted, and I'm trailer trash. I grew up in a trailer in Louisiana, and generally, if you tell someone, hey, I was born and lived in a trailer when I was a kid, they think of you as being, well, I mean, the world is not free of bias these days, as much as people would like to think they're free of bias. They've just changed their bias. And they think you're low class, they think you're unintelligent, they think that you're probably not very well read, that you're not a very pleasant person. And so I was just kind of wanted to thumb my nose at that.
What's interesting about that, you said when you start off a podcast, it's a huge pain in the butt trying to figure out what are you going to do. Because my first microphone was a Blue Yeti, perfectly fine microphone. And then I joined a rundown recording. I have the same exact one sitting right there.
Yeah.
Same exact one sitting right there. Then I joined. First, I have a call with JJ. I actually reached out to him on some podcast guest platform, and I was like, "Oh, he hosts Southern Demonology, and he has stories about Japan and stuff. So sounds like a good candidate." He agreed to be on, and then I saw him with a Shure mic. And I came on the rundown and saw your fancy microphone and everybody else's microphone. And my co-host has a Shure microphone. I'm like, okay, well, I'm missing out here. So,
Well, I'll admit to having a not a severe case of what's called GAS, which means gear acquisition syndrome, where there are people who they just want the stuff. They don't really care about using the stuff. They just want the stuff. So it's cameras and it's audio gear and it's microphones and it's guitars and it's, anything fancy.
Right.
These are mostly toys and mostly men have GAS. Probably some women too, but it's mostly guys who they really want the newest, fanciest thing.
Yeah, I can resonate with that.
This has
But
become my standard microphone. It's I have I have more microphones than should be legal. I literally I literally probably have 20 microphones, any of which would do a perfectly good job.
yeah, I completely understand. I have 2 microphones, and my wife's like, "What's wrong with the Blue Yeti?"
What's wrong with that one? Yeah,
Nothing's wrong with it. I just want the short microphone because everybody else has one, and I don't want to
right.
feel left out.
Well, and it does sound better.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I can tell the quality
Hmm.
from like the recordings I've done in the past. But you did mention that you went on JJ's show. You had some, you know, stories, paranormal stories.
Uh-huh.
I was hoping to wait for Dean to join to go into this topic, but I can't help myself.
Okay. Well,
Why don't you share some of your paranormal experiences?
okay. How far back do you want me to go?
How far back would you like to go? Because I always tell people start from the beginning.
Well, let me go back to my first understanding that there were things in the world that I really did not know about, that I really didn't understand. And it goes back to when I was living in the trailer. There was one event that I am certain I know exactly what happened, and it was not paranormal, but it seemed paranormal to me. I didn't know that word. I had this vague concept of there are things out there in the world that I don't understand. Louisiana is hot most of the time, hot and humid. And we lived in this little trailer, and I didn't have a bed. I mean, we really were pretty much broke. My sister had a bed in the back part of this trailer, and I slept on a shelf that had a big shelf that had been put up on the wall under a little window. I loved being up there. First off, because it was nice and high and it was cool, and nobody else had a shelf. But mainly because of that window. Because a little breeze would come in that we didn't have air conditioning. A little breeze would come in that window, and it would get a little bit cooler. And I could look out at the stars, and I could hear the animals out there. We lived next to a huge pine forest. And one night, you know how your eyes become accustomed to the dark, and you can kind of see things moving around.
Right.
Yeah, that was where I was, and I was in that pleasant state of, I'm not 100% awake, I'm not 100% asleep, I'm kind of happy here. And I saw something moving through the woods, and it moved in a way that I had never seen anything move before. It was very, very fluid, smooth motion. You would see it kind of move from tree to tree, like beautiful, smooth motion. And then it was like it could grab the tree and pull itself up to a higher level. The size of this thing, in my mind, was huge, but it really wasn't. It was really the top of it would have been about 3.5, 4 feet tall. That was that was as big as it was, but it was bulky, and I had no idea what it was, and I called it the glide monster. Have you heard this story before?
I don't think I have.
Okay, because that's going to change the way I tell it. But the audience hasn't heard it. Anyway, I called it the glide monster, and I didn't see that it was causing me any danger, so I go to sleep. And the next day, and hey, mom, I saw something in the woods, and it was gliding. It was a monster of some kind. And my mother did what all mothers should do. She said, "Oh, honey, it wasn't anything. You just saw a raccoon, or you saw a fox, or you saw something, but you didn't see a monster." Yeah, mom, I've seen foxes and raccoons and snakes and nutras and all kinds of things, but I've never seen anything move like this. Never seen anything move like this. Okay, honey, I promise you, whatever it is, it's not going to hurt you. Well, over the next several nights, I continue to see this thing. And I even did things like tapped on the window, seeing if it would look over toward me. It was too dark for me to tell what it was. Well, being a blabbermouth little boy, I would go to school. I was in first grade, and I would tell people, I've got a glide monster in the woods behind my house or behind my trailer.
Let me guess, it spread like wildfire
Oh
at that
man.
point.
You know, I go in and they say, glide monster? You ain't got no glide monster. Yeah, I do. I saw it last night. I got a glide monster. Well, let's hear what that glide monster sounds like. So I would give the story of what the glide monster was. And then all the kids at school went home and said, hey, Dad, this weird dude at school named Victor, he's got a glide monster in his backyard. I wonder what that is. All right, so pretty soon the entire town is aware of this glide monster. And this town was not more than about 400 people. And so, man, it didn't take long at all. Well, this is central Louisiana, and we're talking some very serious rednecks out there.
Oh man,
and
I can see where this is going.
and it wasn't long until people were coming on the property with shotguns.
What?
And they're prowling around these woods looking for the glide monster. And there were people out there at night. And so my mom becomes aware of them. My mom was a tiny woman. She was like 4'11", 5 feet tall, maybe weighed 100 pounds, maybe. And I can see her going out on the porch and, just getting that hands on her hips, you idiots, get off our property with them shots.
Oh, I can picture that.
And they're, well, but there's something. No, man, you get out of here. Okay. And so, because everybody else was afraid of what the glide monster might be, I, who had never had any real fear about it, started becoming afraid. I didn't want to sleep on my shelf anymore. I wanted to sleep on the couch. I wanted to sleep with Mom and Dad. Hey, Mom, I want to sleep on the couch. Maybe the glide monster is going to see me. I can remember the look on her face. And the look was one of, oh, I didn't want to deal with this. But okay. She said, listen, I'm promising you, the glide monster, yes, you saw something, but it's not a monster. Call it what you want. But this weekend, we're going to clear all this up. Okay. So go to school. Kids are still asking me things like, wait, what's going on with the glide monster? My mama told me not to talk about it. My daddy was on your property with a shotgun. Yeah, I know. So that weekend, she dresses me up, and I'm wondering, why is she putting my church clothes on? And so we go on a walk. Now, you got to understand just how rural this place was. It really was about 400 people. There was a single general store with a gas pump out front. It was just a tiny little place. We go on a walk through these pine woods, me holding her hand, and we go way back in the woods. And there was this old cabin. It had been initially at one time a log cabin. Then they had added on to it. So it was a big home. And she knocks on the door, and this very nice black woman answers the door. And she says, well, hi, Mary. How are you? And she says, I'm fine. This is Victor. We're here to meet Wilson. And she says, okay, we've been looking forward to this. Now, Victor, you come on in, and don't you be scared. And you go right in there. And that's where you're going to meet Wilson. So I go into a bedroom, scared. Yes, I was scared, heart pounding. But my mother had told me to do something, and I trusted my mother. I didn't believe anything would happen. And I go in, and sitting in a chair is Wilson. Wilson was a very handsome, very smart, very pleasant 19, 20-year-old black man who had the same genetic condition as Johnny Eck. It's a genetic condition where your legs never develop. He had tiny little legs and tiny little feet, which he kind of kept tucked up under his shirt or under his pants or something. Sacral agenesis. Sacral agenesis is the name. Okay. Had Wilson been endowed with legs, he probably would have been close to 7 feet tall. He was a very large person. And he had these massive hands. And since he had been using his hands to move all through his life, he wore these big, thick leather gloves. He was incredibly strong. If he existed in today's world, he probably would have been a champion high school wrestler, just because he would have been wrestling. He would have been wrestling 130-pound people when he was normally a 260-pound guy. It's because that's what he would have weighed without his legs. But he would have been a killer in the wrestling ring. Well, being a curious little boy, and since this man looked like a regular man, I said, "Are you the man in the woods? Are you what I've seen?" "Yeah, I go out in the woods at night, and that way people don't see me. That way I don't get anybody making fun of me." And so I sat and I talked to Wilson for easily an hour and a half. Played checkers. You know, I told him about the things I like, and he was a very, very kind person. But there wasn't anything monstrous about him. And I learned from that, okay, trust what you see, but once you see something that you don't understand, don't assume that you understand it. Go and try to find out about it. Go and try and find out what's going on. Now, I don't know what I would have done had my mom not known this family. She had been aware of this young man for years. She knew about him. She knew his mother. You know, they would do things like church bake sales together, things like that. This town was generally so segregated that it was difficult for friendships to form between black families and white families. My mother never cared about that kind of stuff. So anyway, that's the first time I became aware that there are things in the world I just don't understand, and they sure can be scary. But there's nothing paranormal about that at all,
Right.
other than just the perception. Now, we did also live next to an old ammonia ice factory. So our trailer was on a chunk of land, and there was this old abandoned ammonia ice factory next to us. We called it the ice house. And you know what I'm talking about? An ammonia ice factory?
I can't say that I
Okay.
do. Why
Back
don't you
when
describe it
back
for
when
us?
people didn't have electrical refrigeration, they used ice boxes to keep their milk from spoiling, and it would keep things from spoiling for a while. But you had to have ice to put in that thing. You would put your ice up high, the cold air would go down to the bottom, and it would keep things relatively fresh for a while. Well, the way they got all that ice was through a process called ammonia absorption. And it's a chemical process that can just get real cold and freeze large quantities of water. And so they would make these ice blocks in things the size of Volkswagens. I mean, so they had cranes, and they had places of cutting the ice, they had saws, they had all kinds of things in there to make it to where they could create all this ice. Well, sometime probably in the 50s, it had become economically unviable to run one of these places because everybody had a real refrigerator. So it was abandoned, and all the equipment that was in there was just left. Well, but gosh, when you're a 6-year-old boy, man, that's a place you want to go. And I had been told many, many, many times, as has my sister, don't go in the ice house. Well, of course we went in the ice house. Every chance we got, we went in the ice house. I knew every nook and cranny of that ice house, and I can remember it very clearly in my head. And it wasn't until years later that I realized that when I was in that ice house, frequently, there were other people there. And I don't remember ever seeing them come into the ice house. I never remember seeing them leaving the ice house, but they were there. They would look at me. They would act as if they were aware that I was there. They would never say anything. There were never any words. And they didn't look like everyone else. They seemed to be just only about half there. But as a kid, you don't necessarily think about this as being something wrong. If I looked at them, I could see a face, I could see bodies. I guess the thing that finally got to me was that it didn't seem like all of them had legs. And I've noticed things like that in ghost photos, that you'll see a ghost photo and there'll be just a hand, or just a head, or just a partial body, or a very small body. It's like a ghost can only manifest a little bit of itself. It takes more energy than it's capable of generating or gathering to do the full apparition. So I was never frightened by these things. They didn't seem to be in any way threatening me, but I just sort of thought of them as the people who live in the ice house. And I believe they were spirits of some kind.
Did your sister see them too, or was it just you?
I would say things like, I'm going to use a different name. Jessica, did you see them? No, I don't see them. And of course, the banter was the kind of banter that little brothers and big sisters have, like, shut up, you dummy. Things like that. So after about the 20th shut up, you dummy, I realized that she's not seeing these things. And it doesn't matter how often I tell her that I see them. That's not going to work its way through. She's not ever going to see that. So what I learned from that was that, okay, at least over there, I can see something that other people can't see. Look, Chris, this was about the spookiest damn place you can imagine. I mean, if it still existed now, there would be all kinds of paranormal investigators out there, with their, you know,
Their dinky
EMF
little,
meters, or
yeah.
what is it? They would be there with their recorders and their infrared cameras and all that. Just because it was that kind of place, I didn't have any of that, and I didn't even really feel like they were anything other than just part of the environment. There were nutrias in there. Nutrias are these monster rats, as big as as big as a medium-sized dog.
What?
I'm seeing the look on your face. Okay, type in nutria, Neutria, nutria, and you'll see what I'm talking about. It's the same animal, more or less, as a capybara, which is all through South America, all through Central America. And so, an aside, they loved eating this animal in Central and South America. When Catholicism became the dominant religion there, they were not supposed to eat meat on Fridays. And several bishops in that area got together and they requested of the Vatican that they classify nutrias, capybaras, as fish.
As
And-
fish.
as
They
fish.
don't look like fish.
They don't look like fish. Doesn't matter.
No.
The Vatican says they're fish. They're fish. And now we get to eat them on Friday. Anyway, there were, in these old vats of water, there were snakes, and there were these nutrias in there who had found their way in there and decided this was a good place to be. They liked being in the water. They were scary. But the spirits or the ghosts or the half people that I saw, they just seemed lonesome and sad. Now, how were those? Were those bad stories?
No, absolutely not. No. Like
This
to me, see, like, and we could keep this in the show. Like, to me, there are no bad paranormal stories. Even the first one, even though it turned out like it wasn't a glide monster, it was an actual person that had some sort of disability that you were not aware of. It's still something in which I didn't know what this was. Because most stories that we encounter, like my stories that I shared on your podcast when I was on there, I still don't know what the hell that was.
Right. Yes, you have lived your whole life with that memory and no understanding at all of what really caused that.
Right, exactly.
Hypotheses.
Right. With your glide monster, your mom was like, "Okay, I'll explain it. You'll see it for yourself." But then we move on to the ammonia ice factory, and you're seeing all these people that are like half bodies. They're acknowledging that you can see them. Your sister can't see them. To me, it reminds me of my sister when we lived in that home where she would see these things. It's like, okay, okay, I'll use her real name because she was on the show before.
Hmm.
Like, okay, Jenny, like whatever, your imaginary friend Andy, like whatever. We don't.
Hmm.
It's just a kid thing, and it turns out she wasn't the only kid that saw that
Really?
Andy person. Yeah, in that home. My cousin saw it as well. So, no bad stories.
Were they afraid to talk about them, or were they
I think as you experienced as a child, it's like, no, there's no such thing, or
right?
like, shut up, you dummy. Like,
Shut up, dummy. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah. That's how your sister talks to you. She doesn't say, "Oh, shut up, dumbass."
right, exactly. Like, I don't have time for this. Like, I don't need to deal with that. So,
I got lots more.
oh, please
Got
continue.
lots more.
I was
It,
just about
it,
to ask.
it was just now. Let me. Those weren't the paranormal ones. The paranormal ones come later. So, as a kid, probably like you, if I went to the library and said, "Okay, go get some books," man, I wanted immediately to go get the monster books, the Bigfoot books, the sea monster books, the ghost books, you know, those books that were just so fascinating to me. I love that stuff as a kid. And so those are the books that I would get. I didn't have anything really paranormal happen to me again until I was an adult. And that's when I was working in critical care and in the emergency department of various hospitals in Houston. And I ran into, I'm going to say 8, but I've sat down and created narratives for about 5 of them. Some of them are so weird that I don't even really know how to talk about them. But I will talk about them if you wish.
You can
Uh,
do that here. Yeah.
the
There's no judge. This is a judgment-free zone, like they say
judgment-free
at
zone.
like they say at Planet Fitness.
The the first 3, yeah, they've kind of gone against that particular rule lately.
Yeah.
But the okay, so look, you work in an ER for years, you become very aware of people's personality, their behavior, their their knowledge level, their honesty level, all kinds of things. We had a girl come into the ER, and I have used the name Gloria. Gloria was somewhere in the age of 10, 11. And she had been brought in by her father, who had rescued her from the attic of a neighbor who had kidnapped her, raped her over a series of several days, and had left her a lot of the time tied up in a Houston attic in the summer. So you can imagine what kind of shape she was in. The police had been looking for this girl, and they had given up. Hey, there's Dean.
Hey, buddy.
Hey, Dean,
Hey
how are
guys,
you?
sorry. Continue with your story. I'll jump in after.
And anyway, the father had rescued her after going around around the neighborhood and figuring out clues. The police had given up on finding her in that neighborhood, but he found her, beat the crap out of the neighbor, called the police. He wouldn't let even the ambulance take her to the hospital. He brought her himself. I thought that was a bad move on his part, but he brought her to the hospital. We're starting to do everything we can, cool her down, get fluids back in her. And her father he has a broken arm. He has a severely damaged face. I think one of his knees was badly injured, but he's protecting her. After a while, Gloria's mother comes into the ED. And that's when I became aware that the world has something that is fundamentally evil and that I do not want to deal with if I don't have to. Gloria's mother was, well, she was Hispanic with very Caucasian features. I don't say that in any kind of racial manner, just what she looked like. And she was very tall, very patrician, dressed beautifully. And this is something that people laugh at me about when I say, but she moved kind of like Wilson moved. It was when she walked, you were almost completely unaware of the movement of her feet and the movement of her body up and down as she walked. When she came into the room, the feeling in the room changed 100%. It went from, yes, this is a horrible thing we're dealing with, to, man, there's something totally wrong here. And this is one of the things that I need to get across. Not everybody feels that. So please let me just take my time and tell this story, because it's a complex story and I never do tell it right. She comes in and she walks over to the husband, who immediately places himself in front of the daughter, and the daughter is doing everything she can to stay away from her. And she says to him, the best I can remember, she said, "Oh, God damn it." You realize he's going to be angry. Did you really, really have to go through all this? Was she really worth it? And there's nothing but anger coming off from her. Her voice was like, have you seen the original movie Dune? The one with the one done by what's his name? David Lynch?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
When they're doing the voice, they've done some kind of little processing in there. Said, you don't have to fight over me. And there are these kind of harmonics, these overtones. That's what her voice sounded like to me. There was a painful harmonic associated with her voice. It hurt me to listen to. At some point, there's this kind of spell falling over the room, and it's like they're dissociating from what's happening. So just to try to alleviate that spell, I just lied. I was looking at her IV and I said, "Dr. Small, looks like her IV is infiltrated. Can I either put a large bore in or get you to put in a PICC line or a central line or something?" And that was enough, just to kind of break that moment. But it got her attention. As we're doing clinical things, she looks at me and she says, with this, here's the term I came up with. And this is what I wrote to JJ. The feeling in the room and the feeling emanating from this woman was what I call insect nihility. Okay? It's like first off, I'm dealing with something that is not deep down in there human. And it doesn't care about, respect, love, or even care about what happens to anything or anyone, including this girl. She says to me, she looks at me and she kind of winks and she says, "Oh, you can see." It's like just like in the movie They Live. You can see. And the look on her face was one of surprise and it was one of anger, but then it was kind of one of amusement. And so she stands up straight and she blows into my face, which first off is a very aggressive, unpleasant kind of thing to do to somebody. And I'm assaulted by a smell. And the smell was not any of your standard demonic smells. It wasn't feces or dead dog or any of that kind of stuff. It was the smell of industrial waste that I had encountered in this abandoned oil derrick behind my house in Louisiana as a kid. And just that smell scared the Jesus out of me. As that's a smell that I should not go around. It's probably, even at that age, it's probably doing something bad to me. And I can just remember this fear that I had as a child. And that was the smell. And she kind of chuckles and she continues this kind of, I don't know, focusing on me, which I was a little bit happy because she wasn't focusing on the girl. The girl was doing everything she could to hide, to get her father in front of her. Anyway, this goes on for several minutes, and then she just does the look like, okay, not a damn thing I can do here. And so she looks at the man, at her husband, who has done nothing except try to protect the girl, and says, "Well, you broke his nose. He'll probably sue us." And once again, the unidentified he, and he will be very, very unhappy. I hope she was worth it. I'm going to have to start all over. And then she kind of glides out of the room and leaves. And when she leaves, finally, the feeling in the room kind of goes back to something like a normal world. And everybody can do their job. And see, that's one of the really, really good things about working in an ER, or just being a nurse, or just being a doctor. Your life is very defined. Okay. I don't have to like the person I'm working on. I just have to work on them. It's my job to keep that body alive. It's my job to keep that body healthy, to help them any way I can. Afterward, of course, the girl was taken up to ICU. The doctor was talking to the police. The father was refused care until he was certain that the girl was fine. And as soon as all that was over, within an hour, I was trying to do my nursing notes, and I kept saying to myself, my mind wouldn't focus. I kept saying to myself the words love and indifference, love and indifference, love and indifference. And I'll tell you where that came from in a few minutes. But I would say to people, hey, what do you think about Gloria? Who? Gloria, the girl we just. Oh, yeah, that wasn't very. That was a bad situation, and it was just almost as if the memory of her being there had been wiped out. So there were two things I noticed about these patients, or these families, or these people, or more than two. But one, I was exceedingly aware of what was going on. The situation was extremely evil, and when these people were there, the rules of the hospital fell apart. Hospitals have rules, who can be in the room, who can't be in the room, and it was as if those rules just totally disintegrated, and almost nobody else could remember them except me. So I believe that Gloria's mother was perfectly possessed. I believe that she had bonded herself with something non-human and was completely comfortable in being non-human. And I believe that it was probably her who handed the daughter over to the neighbor for whatever benefit, I don't know. But I've never seen a girl. I mean, I've seen lots of children hurt. I've seen people killed. I've seen infants die. There was a shift one time where there were 3 infants who died on that one shift. That's statistically very, very, very unlikely. Didn't matter. That's what happened. But there was something incredibly sad and something incredibly painful about that, but there was nothing innately evil about that. These were infants who died of natural causes that we could not keep alive. There was just something innately evil about what happened with Gloria's mother. So that's incident number 1. I'll let you comment if you wish.
If I may,
You
what
may.
really shook me is when you said she looked at you and said, "Oh, you can see."
Yeah.
That is, to me, that is the dead giveaway of there's something not right here. Like, out of all people, you could have said that to the doctor.
Mm-hmm.
But out of all people in that room, she had to look at you
Mm-hmm.
and say those words. And it
Mm-hmm.
makes me think back. Here's how I make the weird connections in my mind. You remember that old show back in the day called Connections or something like that,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
where everything's all connected. You being able to see those half spirits in that ammonia factory.
Yeah.
Whereas your sister couldn't. What I wanted to ask you, but like, do you think you had some sort of gift where you could see these things or you could feel these things? Because I can definitely tell you from my personal experiences, I can feel when something is off with someone.
I can
You
feel when
feel
something
those.
is off with someone. And Chris, and look, I'm gonna go down. I grew up in a very abusive household, where I was abused, my mother was abused, and you develop what I call hypervigilance, where you're just watching all the time. You're listening for any little change in someone's voice. You're listening for any pattern that's different. And so, yes, you become very aware. So I'll watch your face. I'll watch Dean's face. And any tiny little micro emotion that comes across your face, my brain will immediately go, oop. What's that? But I wonder sometimes if it's not something deeper than that. Yes, I became very hypervigilant and very aware of people's facial expressions and the sounds of their voice. But I could see that as soon as she walked in the room, that something was fundamentally wrong. And it seemed like everybody else in the room, it's almost just like they became confused. I'm glad she left, because I was really the only one at that time really trying to render care to this little girl. And she had a perfectly good IV. I just totally lied. It was
You did what you thought you had to
it was
do.
all I could figure out to say at the time to kind of break the spell.
Right,
So
right.
I have no way of knowing exactly what happened to her or with her. But if anybody was ever perfectly possessed, it was her.
I just have an image of when you described her for some reason, Morticia from the Addams Family.
Yeah, there was, and she walked like that too, didn't she?
Yeah.
No.
She kind of floated into
Well, she
wherever.
was a lot less benevolent than Morticia. Morticia. Okay, second story, and this is the one that you're going to have to be careful as to. I don't know who controls what goes on the podcast, but you are definitely going to have to check the "yes, this is explicit" button when you publish it.
Sure.
There's
Before
no,
we go into that, Vic,
yeah.
Dean joined us a little bit ago while Vic was telling his first hospital story. Dean, do you have any questions or anything before Vic goes on to the next story?
I don't know. I am curious. I guess this is the only time I'll probably get to ask questions about it. My questions are really minute, and you'll probably see why I'm asking them in a second. But was anybody else in the room wearing glasses but you? Were you wearing glasses that day?
I've worn glasses every day of my life since 5th grade.
Oh. Was anybody, do you recall if anybody else in the room was wearing glasses?
Dr. F wore glasses.
Mm.
Lydia wore glasses. Let's see. Those are the only two I can remember.
No, that's cool. The only thing I thought, like whenever you were talking about the woman floating into the room, and I missed part of the story in the beginning, so this might be counter to what happened earlier. But when she said that, they're like, "Oh, you can see." I just in my mind at that point in the story, I envisioned like a really pissy woman who just is not pleasant to be like dealing with, and then
Yeah.
she's just like she's frustrated. She has to be there, and you guys tending to the little girl really aren't paying attention to her, and then somebody happens to look up at her wearing glasses, and then her mind just goes, "Oh, what's the most nuanced thing I can say that is an insult to someone who's wearing glasses?" Like, "Oh, you can see now.
You can
Oh,
see
I'm here.
now.
Like, hey, I'm in front of you." All the other parts of the story, it still elevates the creepiness by a
Yeah, but
factor of
let's
10,
talk about
especially
what
the
you're talking
smell.
about there. Then you're just describing a very unpleasant, aggressive kind of woman. And you deal with them, and it's not pleasant. It can even be kind of frightening.
Karens.
Karens, yeah. No, oh, she would have been champion Karen, but this was something far, far beyond that.
Viscerally heavy. Yeah.
Viscerally heavy, insect nihility,
Yeah.
and that's the man. I tell you, that's it just the worst feeling I've ever had. Have you ever? All right, here's what I described it as. Imagine taking a ball of aluminum foil and chewing on it for a while. Especially if you're lucky enough to have like a metal crown or something. I mean, just imagine what it's like to be chewing on aluminum foil. I mean, you can imagine that kind of tingling, that horrible feeling that would go through your body. Okay, let me tell the story of, I think I've called him William. And you realize I've done everything I can to change people's names in here. Yeah, I did call him William. Case 2, William, fictional name. This is a horrifying story. We got an ambulance into the hospital. Okay, first off, let me give some pre-knowledge. This was back early in the HIV/AIDS path of development. And most people today just don't understand what a world that was back then. Suddenly, we had all these young men who were dying of opportunistic infections. We had hemophiliacs who were dying of opportunistic infections. And a form of cancer that you hardly ever see, Kaposi sarcoma, which is very rare, and a very unusual type of pneumonia, pneumocystis pneumonia. People were baffled. They did not know what was going on. First off, then they started realizing that, okay, there are a lot of gay men who are dying from this. And so they called it GRID, which was gay-related immunodeficiency disorder. And all across the country, the place where the places that were hit the hardest, first off, were San Francisco. And second was Houston. It was a place where they did a lot of hemophiliac care. So they were collecting large amounts of blood and giving this blood to people who needed those clotting factors. And a lot of those people got AIDS. So a few years down the line, we finally realized that, okay, this is a retrovirus and we don't have any way to treat it right now. There were places where physicians and nurses simply refused to take care of those kind of patients, of AIDS patients. I never did that. I just figured if I'm going to use my normal isolation techniques and I'll be fine. And I was. However, there were pushbacks. In the gay community in Houston, there developed a very militant subculture, saying things like, you're discriminating against us because of our sexuality, and we're not going to follow your rules. We're going to lie about giving blood. We're going to not use safe sex. We're going to do everything we can to just be our own community. They actually had groups within that group. They call themselves bug hunters. And I know you'll probably get some people saying to you, "Hey, he's lying about that." No, I'm not. And I've talked to these people. I mean, their goal was to become HIV positive. So they had then, within that community, occasionally what they called mummification parties. Mummification is when someone was wrapped in a full body cast, nose opening, eyes covered, mouth opening, genitalia and anus open to the world, and just toes sort of sticking out. The idea was that they would use a cattle prod to force ejaculation from this person who had agreed to be placed into this cast, and that they could do whatever they wanted otherwise, because the person in the cast was fully helpless, fully unable to do anything about it. Well, okay, this is you can initially sort of think that, okay, this is an extreme form of S&M. Okay, but at this party, they had decided that they wanted to take it further, and they plugged this guy into direct 220 volts with electrodes on his genitalia and on his right big toe. And so essentially what they did was they initially just electrocuted him, and second, they burned him. I mean, they incinerated him. It was essentially as if you took a hot dog and take a hot dog, get a regular electrical cable, cut it off, splice each end to a fork, put each end of the fork into the hot dog, plug it in, and you'll cook that hot dog. That's what they did to him. So they bring him into the ER. Why they brought him into the ER, I don't have the slightest idea. See, this is another one of those situations where it seemed like the rules of the day, the rules of the world went away. Bring him into the ED, very quickly determined, look, there's nothing we can do here. This guy's been dead for a while. This guy's cooked inside this cast. His abdomen has exploded. His eyeballs have popped out. And the job of removing this cast, for some reason, was given to me. I didn't volunteer for that job, but I always did volunteer for what's called post-mortem care. Okay, so somebody dies, and they need to be cleaned up. They need to be placed in a position where they're more presentable to their family. So I didn't think of it as being all that different, but I started doing this, and getting this thing off was not easy. Much of the material had fused to his body. This process must have taken hours. First off, someone who knew how to create a plaster cast, had to do so. Then they had to let it dry. Have you ever had a plaster cast? Okay, so
yeah, sorry, I have, yeah.
Yeah, what does it feel like? as they
It's
put it
pretty
on,
constricting, and yeah, well, I mean, it's wet, and it
and
takes a while to
warm.
dry.
Yeah,
and
there's
warm.
a chemical reaction going on to where the cast is very warm on your arm for a while before it dries. And so his entire body was in this heat generating cast. And so as I'm taking this cast off, in strolls a detective from the Houston Police Department with someone who is wearing handcuffs. And the detective comes over and says, "Yeah, that's about what they said it was going to be." The man wearing handcuffs starts taunting me. And the taunting is one of something along the lines of, "Well, who's this fine young man rendering such loving care to the dead?" And he was very flamboyant, and he was very sing-songish in his way of dealing with things. And within just a minute or so, I'm right back. These are happening chronologically. I'm right back in that insect nihility point where it's like, oh man, something is not right here. And this guy says, it's my idea. He thought it was his idea, but I put that idea in his head. And this taunting is going on. And so finally I asked this policeman, "Can you please get him out of here?" And at that point, I had urinated my pants. I was that scared. And at some point in doing this, I'm just going to use the language I used. I walk out to the nursing station, and whoever the doctor was, Dr. P, why the fuck am I in there taking off this cast on this dead man? Why isn't this a coroner's job? I'm not doing this crap anymore. I was yelling. I was livid. I was mad. And he says, "Okay, what do you want?" I said, "Well, I want someone else to do this job. I want him out of here, and I got to go take a really, really long shower and get some new scrubs." And I did. And so, once again, horrible situation, incredibly evil, in that this was murder, and the person who did the murder was laughing about it. And that feeling of insect nihility and that breaking down of the rules. There's no reason for that. There was no reason for that policeman to be in there with that civilian. I've never seen that happen any other time. There's just was no reason for it at all. And then after it was all over, everybody just acted like, "Oh, yeah, I guess I remember him." It did not stick in people's minds. So I started putting together those characteristics. You see it once, you're thinking, okay, this is an anomaly. This is a behavioral anomaly. If you see it twice, then you start to think somehow there's a connection. What are your thoughts about that one?
I'm going to let you take that one, Dean.
Gee, thanks, man. Let me talk about the mummification, electrocution, eyes bulging. I have to say, as a side note, before I go into my questions and adding to the conversation, I actually worked. I don't know if you knew this, Vic, but I worked in a hospital. My first job.
Yeah, I knew
out
you
of
did.
high
Yeah.
school. Oh, okay. Yeah. So, I had seen a lot of creepy stuff, but I've never seen anything anywhere near as heavy. I think the heaviest thing I ever did was like walk into the morgue or whatever, like the mini morgue, and see the body. So props to you for handling. Where did you work at again? Like, was it a major city where you saw all these crazy things, or was it just like the period in which you were working?
This was Houston. I worked in a third of the hospitals in Houston over time.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Maybe not a third, maybe a fourth. But I worked both at large trauma centers, large complex ERs, and the community ERs, as well as ICUs.
Yeah, I guess if people aren't familiar, if you've never worked in a hospital, it's technically like a statistical rule where the larger the hospital, the more dense the area, the crazier the stories you have. The greater the frequency of intense things that are going on. Even working, me working in a regional hospital, which isn't anything special, we were kind of the central hub for seeing all, the whole gambit of all the crazy things. So we did get some stuff, but not anything nearly as intense as that. But I want to ask though,
this particular hospital was,
yeah.
You're in Honolulu, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Queens. What is Queens now? Maybe 400 beds or so?
I would guess that.
Yeah.
There's Queens West and there's Queens.
Oh, that's right. They've
Honolulu,
expanded. Yeah. Well, anyway, this hospital would have been about the size of the original Queens.
Oh, okay. Well, that's not terribly large, but you were in an area that was pretty densely populated.
Oh, very densely populated, and just
Yeah.
miles down the road were 1,000-bed hospitals.
Right, right.
Mhm,
Interesting.
mhm.
So this particular case, you were talking about the police officer being there, and did you say the police officer was the escort for the person who was
No,
involved
he
in
was a
this thing?
detective. He was a detective investigating
Okay.
the case.
And he's the
Invest
one who acted in a strange manner?
Well, just the fact that he was there with the person who was the murderer was acting in
Right.
a strange manner. Now, here's the thing, though. I do remember I said, "What the hell are you doing here?" And he said, "He's got both powers of attorney," talking about the man that he was with. So I'm thinking that this was his partner of some kind. So he probably could, exert some sort of legal right to be there. But I don't ever remember. I have seen multiple murders. I don't ever remember the policeman bringing the murderer to the hospital or the suspected murderer to the hospital. I don't remember that ever happening under any circumstance except here.
Yeah. The only thing I could think of in a case like that is whenever a police officer escorts somebody to a hospital, it's because they need treatment before they
Hmm.
can take them to
Take them to jail.
the
Yeah.
jail.
Hmm.
Right, but this sounds like a different case. This is one in which the body was there and it was clearly deceased by that point. So the
Yep.
person responsible was with. So that's actually an anomaly to me. You're absolutely right. Like the police officer. I mean, the only thing I could think of is perhaps they called the police and the ambulance to the scene after they realized that the person being mummified in a sexual way was dead. And then possibly the police had never seen anything like that, so they were still trying to figure out, like, well, we have someone who had probably had consent to do what was being done.
Right.
So we don't have a justification to arrest him quite yet. So maybe the police officer was just hoping that you guys found something that was clearly definitively saying like he was murdered, and then they would just arrest him. But it was just a weird, because I imagine police officers don't see that shit every single day, just like
Oh
you didn't
no,
see that
no,
every single
nobody
day.
sees that shit every
So
day. I mean,
thank you.
you know,
Thankfully.
it's like in the movie Ghostbusters where they're looking at the building and it's made of what, titanium and molybdenum and things like that, and he says, "Well, they don't make them like this anymore." And then one of the
Oh
scientists
man.
says, "No, they didn't ever make them like this."
That's really crazy though.
um,
So
I
sorry, go ahead, man.
Go ahead. It seemed to me like these people who have made this, whom I believe, and look, this is my belief. I could be 100% wrong. I believe they have made this pact, this joining with some demonic entity. And I think they gain power in doing so. And I think one of the powers they gain is the ability to cloud other people's minds.
I do, yeah, absolutely. But the interesting thing I'll let Chris jump in because I see you leaning in there. But the last thing I wanted to ask your perspective on, Vic, is so in these two particular cases, some of the most powerful cases you've ever experienced of, possession. To me, in my mind, hearing these stories, I think, and you could correct me if I'm wrong or have a different perspective, but when I hear the story about the woman, that almost seems like in your wildest dreams, you could probably imagine that she actually actively made a decision to do some ceremony or do something where she, like in the movies where she drew a pentagram or whatever, whatever imagination you have,
Yeah, I didn't.
and then take on that entity. But the other case, the case of the sexual mummification, that I can almost envision a scenario in which the person just let themselves slip so much towards apathy and being self-centric and sociopathic and just completely losing their soul to their actions and their decisions sequentially, to where something can like made its way into them because that person made themselves open, as opposed to doing a really like an actual ceremony that had to do with conjuring up something. Is that kind of are there two sides to that coin, or do you think it always has to be the former?
Oh, I think what the scenario you're discussing is completely plausible. Um, Slouching toward Gomorrah, I think, is sort of the term that they've used in the past of just, no, you did not destroy your soul in one fell swoop. You destroyed your soul bit by bit by bit by bit. And finally, you got to a point where your soul was so damaged and so diminished that anything that wanted to come along and take advantage of you was capable of doing so. I have no question that those kind of things can happen. These demonic perfect possession stories,
Yeah,
they
man,
take a
like,
lot out of me.
yeah, if they're getting to you, we could definitely move on to
Yeah,
something
they take a
else.
lot out of me. But this one isn't so bad. I mean, it was
Okay.
a horrible circumstance, but I don't believe there was anything demonic involved in it. I think it was just flawed humans. Okay, I mean, there's a big difference. Flawed humans can, under certain circumstances, do very terrible things, but
Right.
they're not necessarily driven by demonic forces.
Right.
Okay, so in this story, it was a young man. They all seem to be about 25. You know, life seems to either, at 25, people seem to either kind of get their life together or things just totally fall apart. 25, 26. He was in a relationship. I don't know if he was married or if it was his girlfriend or what, but he had slept with another girl in the bed in their home, and they had gotten drunk and fallen deeply asleep. The girlfriend comes home, finds him in bed with this other girl, and decides the best thing to do is to go to her purse, get out her little 25 caliber pistol, and to go up and shoot him in the head like a colander. Bam, 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 bam. I think it was a Browning, meaning it held 14 or 15 rounds. So he had 15 or 14 25 caliber bullets in his head. Those bullets don't have enough force to come out the other side. They have enough force to go in and scramble things around and bounce around some, but they don't come out. Well, there's not much of a brain left when that happens. The way that she had done it, she had, and I'm sure this wasn't deliberate, so pretty much all of his higher function in his brain were dead, were gone. But there was enough left for his heart to beat, for him to kind of occasionally agonally breathe, kind of breath. And so he didn't die immediately, which is a horrible thing if you think about it. His consciousness, I believe, was dead. They brought him to the ED. They intubate him. They do what they can, mannitol. What can we do to decrease the pressure in his head? And they're trying to monitor that pressure. Well, he was on a ventilator. Now, your body does not want to be in a ventilator. A ventilator means there's a plastic tube going down your trachea. And you've got millions of years of evolution telling you, no, you don't want anything in your trachea. Get that thing out of my trachea. And so your body naturally fights against that, even if you're not consciously fighting. And so they call that bucking. Okay, so you'll get these very powerful coughs. And when you cough like that, all of the pressures in your body go up. The pressures in your abdomen, the pressures in your lungs, and the pressure inside your head. So when he would cough like that, little pieces of brain matter would come up through the 14 holes in his skull. So it'd be like a brain fountain, pieces of brain squirting out of his head. And I was assigned to take care of him, and I got brain squirted on my face and on my forehead. I was to the point where very few things bothered me. Very few things bothered me, but that bothered me. That bothered me a great deal. This is not what the story is about. This is a story about what I believe was a living ghost. So I can remember the way this ICU was set up. He was in the bed next to a wall. And then there were not walls between the other beds. They were just curtains. It wasn't very big, and the curtains really helped because when we got busy, people could help each other. It was a fishbowl. There was no privacy. But I remember walking back toward his bed from the other end of the unit and seeing a doppelganger of him standing next to the bed, beckoning, kind of a horrified look on his face, mouthing something like, "Help me." And I could see him holding his arms up. I could see this look on his face. He'd look down. It was a ghost of a living person because he wasn't yet dead. He was going to be dead pretty soon, but he was not yet dead. But it seems to me that he was able to create something like a ghost in some kind of attempt to communicate with the world. And it didn't scare me. It didn't do anything other than just make me once again feel sad. Here's this guy, his brain has been turned into even more mush, and he's dying. But there's some part of him left behind trying to figure out what's going on, trying to get help. Nobody else saw it.
Go ahead, Chris. You got some?
I'm thinking, and this is just me speculating. He was probably because you said he was on a ventilator, so I'm assuming he was on some sort of life support machine and all these medications to kind of keep him stable.
As much as possible.
Right. That he was probably in that veil between both worlds, in
Oh,
which
yeah.
his body was alive, but his soul was kind of like out there. Because when people say they have NDEs and they die and come back, they say that they see themselves. They
Yes,
can
they
see
do.
themselves on the operating table. They could see themselves in the hospital bed. I'm thinking that is probably one of those cases in which he was probably, I don't know, he was probably thinking like, let me go, maybe. Like, I can't come back here.
I don't know. The feeling there, once again, there was no feeling there of anything fundamentally evil. It was just a feeling of very sad. I've talked to a number of people who had NDEs, and my experiences in talking with them are different from most of what you hear, in that they were split about 50-50. For the people I've talked to, they were about 50% positive and about 50% really negative. So
Vic, you you are someone who has experienced quite a bit more than the average person.
Yep.
So I guess, one curiosity I have is when was the last time you truly experienced something to that, umpteenth degree of just clear, you're looking at something that is unexplainable, or you have that insect nihility like you were talking about? Like, when was the last time you truly experienced that? And was there a time in your life when you think you experienced that more than other parts, or was it kind of just equally spread out?
Well, no. It was not equally spread out. The pinnacle, the peak, the time of greatest concentration was when I was working in the hospitals. Okay, directly delivering patient care. And that makes perfect sense. That makes sense. I mean, look, it's a place of incredible emotional intensity all the time. And if anything is going to be attracted to that kind of emotional intensity, that would be where you would see paranormal stuff. See, I don't buy. You'll watch these ghost hunting shows, and they always go to the same places. They go to the Myrtles Plantation. They go to these places that are making a lot of money by being a haunting hotspot. I don't think there's anything special about those places at all. I think if you were to go to any old barn in Lancaster County, you're probably going to find more or less the same amount of psychic activity going on there. I don't think there's anything all that special, but that's where people have decided they're going to see things. As I stopped working in the hospitals, life just became very mundane as far as the paranormal goes. And by paranormal, I'm saying something that cannot be fully explained just by physical causality. Okay, chemical processes, mechanical processes, electronic processes. Very few things in life can't be explained that way. And that's kind of one of the reasons that it's hard for me to talk about these stories, is because most of my friends are atheist engineers. and they're not particularly open to these kind of stories. The next thing and the last thing that happened to me happened in 2003. And that was not a ghost. That was not a demon. So I don't think it was. It was a cryptid sighting in the forests in southern Australia, somewhere between the Yarra Ranges and the Blue Mountains. And I had gone down there to do work. I'd gone down there to do some simulation. But you don't get to go to Australia very often. And so I decided I would use some vacation time and spend some extra time there after I got through with that work. And I did. I went, I stayed out in the desert for a while. I saw Ayers Rock. I saw as much of Australia as I could in, say, a 2.5 week period. And I love to hike, I love to camp. So one of the nice things about going on a trip like that is you rent a vehicle and you can live very cheaply. You sleep in your hammock, you sleep in your tent. You go to state parks, you go to campgrounds. But I wanted to get as far away from the world as I could. I was going through some emotionally difficult times. And I found, by talking to rangers, a trailhead where they said I could hike back, as far as I wanted, and the trail never completely disappeared, and I should be able to find my way back. I don't know how much hiking and camping you've done, but by the time you're one day out, you don't run into very many people. Very few people want to hike that far away from civilization. So I was one day out on this trip. Wake up the next morning, you wake up when the kookaburras start screaming or laughing. They wake you up. I go on this trail, and I'm going to try to make this short because I don't really want to delve deep down into it again. I've told this story 3 or 4 times recently, and it takes a toll on me too. See, that's the thing. These people who come on, this is one of the reasons I feel skeptical sometimes. There are people who come on these shows and they talk about these very intense paranormal events, and it's like they're telling you about their grocery trip.
Yeah, I definitely know the feeling, because when we went on your show, Trailer Trash Terrors, I gave you probably 5% of what I experienced, because it's not really fun to talk about.
Oh, it's not.
Because you're right, it does take a lot out of you. You have to make sure that you recount every detail to the best of your ability, and as you're recounting these stories, it's like you're living it all over again. And it's at least that's the case for me. And it's like that's why I've never done an episode solely dedicated to what I experienced,
to what you experienced
on my show. The only places I've briefly mentioned it is on your show, a few things on the rundown, which kind of I noticed freaked you out to the point where you took out some holy water and did the cross. and I shared, I think on JJ's show is when I shared pretty much a whole bunch of it. I didn't share everything because it's one of those things. It's like, okay, where do I draw the limit?
Where do you draw the line?
Yeah.
And I first told, look, I didn't tell this story until late last year. I haven't told this story to my sons. And they don't even care about my podcast, so they'll get it if they get it. But once you place it somewhere in your mind where you're safe and comfortable with it, you don't really want to dredge it up a whole lot. And that's why I'm always somewhat skeptical about these people who just act like these stories don't have any emotional impact on them at all. Because they do. Hiking along, way out there in the wilderness of Australia, at least a full day's hike out. About 2:00 that afternoon, I had a happy non-normal event. I won't say paranormal because I ran into an animal. There's nothing in Australia that can hurt you, really, except spiders and snakes. They can hurt the heck out of you. But there are no lions, there are no bears, but there are dingoes, and dingoes are wimps. They don't even hunt in packs. But I come around a corner and there's this animal, and it's an animal the size of a large, medium-sized dog. Huge jaws, got the stripes, got the long tail, got the long front legs, got the short back legs. It's a thylacine, okay? It's a Tasmanian wolf, Tasmanian tiger. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful thing. And the most incredible mouth you've ever seen. It opens its mouth. Gosh, it's like it could eat another one of itself. How wide it can open its mouth. And I even remember thinking, like, why did it evolve that ability to open its mouth that wide? Watch it for 10 seconds. As soon as I make any kind of move that's not expected, it turns around, jumps off into the bush. Okay, I can tell you that story all I want, and there's no emotional problem with it at all. Except most people tell me that I'm a liar. I had gone across
Because they're extinct, aren't they?
they are
Supposedly. Yeah.
they are supposedly extinct. I believe there are small pockets of them that they've figured out a way to stay away from people and get together often enough to where they can stay genetically viable.
Yeah.
And there are other examples of animals doing that. So I know there's at least one family group of them. Now, of course, you can't have that. You've got to have a minimal population. So that minimal population could be what, in the hundreds? But Australia's a pretty big place. And there are a lot of places where people don't go very often. Okay. No emotional impact with that. Yes, I saw an animal. Darn, I wish I had my camera out. But I didn't. I'd gone all across Australia with a really high-end SLR, not a DSLR, actual film camera, and took thousands of pictures. But I didn't get a picture of him or her. I think it was a him. But as I continued to walk, sometime around 5 in the evening, I found myself. And look, this sounds cliche. The sounds of the forest changed. The feeling of the forest changed. Things became oppressive. I come to something that's like a clearing, and there are no more sounds of the forest. And there were 3 things that were happening to my body. First off, I would feel a feeling of absolute dread and horror and fear and sadness. It was like being in the presence of a dementor, where your brain simply said, there will be no more joy in the world ever. Incredible nausea. It's incredible nausea, but not an immediate desire to throw up. It was just like, look, sometimes when you have deep nausea, it's a relief to throw up. You can get rid of that nausea for a little while. And a smell. And this was more of the traditional smell, but it wasn't the smell. It didn't behave like a normal odor. Okay. A normal odor, let's say that something dies in your backyard. Okay. A rat, a dog, or something. Well, it will start to smell. And you will be aware of it far away, but as you get closer to it, the smell will intensify. This was like binary, where you could walk along and suddenly smell, no smell. Smell, no smell. I become aware that there is a creature standing 15 feet away from me. Next to it, copse of trees, those little scrub kind of trees they have in Australia. I guess they're eucalyptus trees, maybe gum trees, but it is, for lack of a better word, partially cloaked. I can't fully see it. And the feeling that I had in my mind was one of, it's like watching an octopus. You ever seen an octopus swim up and put itself on a rock, and within a second, it's assumed the colors of the rock, and sometimes they can even assume the textures of the rock. And so it's very, very hard to see. That's what this thing could do. It seemed to me like it could control its hair, and it wasn't fur, it was hair, in such a way that it was like a metamaterial, where it could manipulate the light. It could manipulate what you could see. Not a standard Patty-type Bigfoot, taller. I told Bert 3 meters. So 9 feet 6 or something, and taking that height from the angle I had to hold my head at to look at it like I would look at a basketball goal. So not quite as tall as a basketball goal, but almost. Muscular beyond what you could believe. Various hair patterns. Quite a bit of hair on the top of its head. Less hair in its face. Very intelligent eyes. Hands that were far larger than they needed to be. Monster hands. Huge hands. Like Michelangelo's David hands. Monster. Huge hands. And intelligent eyes. Not a face that had not a standard hooded nose, but something more like a snout, and the ability to become more or less visible as it pleased. Finally, it becomes very, very visible. Once again, whenever I'm extremely frightened, it seems like my primary response is to urinate in my pants. That's happened to me a number of times. I made the conscious decision that I did not want to defecate in my pants because it was hot and I didn't want to. If I had to stay that way, I didn't want to be hiking along with my pants full. I was able to control that. That's about all I was able to control. I made a very definite error as I moved my hand toward my camera, and that was the only sound I heard from this thing, and it was a don't do that. And so the question I have is, okay, I'm totally helpless. I'm either going to die or it's going to let me go. This lasted a while. I mean, this was not seconds, this was minutes. And then finally I kind of get the feeling, it wasn't like verbal speak. It wasn't a matter of like, okay, time for you to go. It was just sort of a change in the position of the face or the eyes or something. And it was clear to me that time for me to leave. The hardest part of that entire experience was turning around because that suddenly meant that I had to expose my back to whatever this was, and there was nothing I could do. I wasn't going to run. I just continued to walk. I walked with my urine-soaked pants until I just became exhausted. And then I sat down on my hammock, changed my clothes, and then went back to my car the next day. And the fear then was that I would have lost my passport or my keys, which I had in my pack. and they were there. Behavior after that was I was finally able to find a place to stay, spent hours in the shower. The next day, tried to talk to the police. They were very dismissive. They were very angry. You stupid Americans, you come here and you make trouble. What the hell are you doing? Get out of our town. When are you supposed to go back to Sydney? Give up on that. Drive out thinking I can at least talk to a ranger. Find a ranger in the general same area, and they say, hey, my name's I know who you are. you're that damn American. When are you going back to Sydney?
They're like, just go.
It's like,
We
just
don't
go,
want to talk
leave,
about it.
get the hell out of here. So I do, and I spent the rest of the trip not camping the way I wanted to, but finding campgrounds in cities, and occasionally staying. See, I was trying to do this really cheaply, and staying in really low level hotels and things like that. So I don't know what this was. I assume it's a yowie. That's the Australian word for Bigfoot. It didn't look anything like the description of yowies that I get. So what are the possibilities? A, I'm lying. I'm not. B, I had some astounding hallucination. Never had any hallucinations any other time in my life. Why would I hallucinate right then? 3, I saw something that was out there that I can't begin to tell you what it was. And it horrified me. It terrified me. It wasn't a matter of, look, my worldview isn't changed that this thing exists. I've always held that possibility out. What changed was, hey, I don't have any control over the next few minutes whether I live or die. Now, truth is, even at this moment, none of us have any control over whether we live or die the next 10 minutes. But it's less apparent to us. So that is the very last paranormal event that I had. And I'm not really looking forward to having any more, except all the EVPs that I have on my show.
If somebody really wanted to experience these things more frequently, do you think that it's innate in you? I know you chuckled because, who would want to experience the terrible things that you've experienced?
Oh, no, I know there are people who would. Yeah, I know there are people who would.
But what I really mean is the people who have never experienced things like this and want to because they have kind of romanticized idea about it.
Sure.
It's one of those things like, you read about guys who were getting shipped off to World War I, and you watch videos of them as they're training before they're shipped off. And they look all giddy and excited, like, oh, I'm going to go off and be a hero. And then it's the worst possible fighting you can imagine in human history at that point. So it's like, I think of it like that way,
Well,
like, of course you want to go off to war. You're full of bravado and it's part of your social construct. But then,
right.
you realize trench warfare is, no fun for anybody, but it's like the same thing. So do you think that people who want to experience this for whatever motivation, is it something that is achievable for everybody? Or do you think that it's someone like you who's experienced it more heavily than others, there's something in you or some energy that was bore in you when you were, when you came to this world. Which one do you think it is?
Look, Dean, that's the question I ask myself all the time. I never went looking for any of these things. They just happened to me. And I think that's how most paranormal or cryptid events happen. I don't know if you could increase your chances of encountering a cryptid. I don't really think so. Well, look, other than if the cryptids are in the woods and you never go to the woods, you'll probably never encounter a cryptid. But if you go to the woods, you're still probably never going to encounter a cryptid. So why people have those things happen to them, I don't know. I don't think you can increase that. My feeling is that if you go into the world looking for paranormal events, encouraging them to happen, asking them to happen, yeah, you'll find them, you'll get them. I don't think you'll be happy that you got them, but you will get them. I'd asked JJ a long time ago. I said, the question I had, and we really ended up talking about it a lot, is there any joy in the paranormal? And the answer is not very often. And we finally found one joyous story, or more or less joyous story. And that was a woman who was more or less raised by ghosts in Ireland. But and then also there's the other question of what is it that allows people to experience these things? And so I guess I come back to magic in various universes. So in the Harry Potter universe, I mean, is magic something that exists within Harry and not within the Dursleys? Is it something that exists in the world all around and Harry has the special organ that lets him interact with it and the Dursleys don't have that organ? What exactly is it? And she very carefully never makes that clear. As to is the magic in Harry or is the magic in the world? Because I think most people would choose that they didn't want to have the magic.
That's a really good example, and I always, because I'm a huge Middle Earth junkie, as I tell everybody, I think I love Harry Potter as well, but I think Tolkien does a better way of explaining that, in which he breaks down the realm you can see and the unseen realm.
Correct.
For example, with the Fellowship, for all intents and purposes, Elrond wanted Glorfindel to go with the Fellowship. But they kind of...
You understand why.
Yeah, but Tolkien reneged on the idea because Glorfindel was reincarnated from the Glorfindel that fought the Balrogs at Gondolin, and that Glorfindel saw the light of the trees, and elves that were exposed to the light of the trees in the unseen world, they are these, for all intents and purposes, because I don't know how else to explain them, and Tolkien's like, I hate allegories, yada yada yada, which is bullshit. I think his entire story is based off of Catholicism, because he was a devout Catholic. They're angelic beings.
Yes.
And there was no way for them to sneak 9 people 3,000 miles to Mordor with the equivalent of the angel Gabriel accompanying them.
Right. You're going to assume that, I mean, it's been a while since I got deeply into Tolkien, but my understanding is that Gandalf, Sauron, the Balrog, they're all essentially Maiar.
Yes.
Yeah, yes. They're all forms of Maiar.
Yeah, they're like these strong spiritual...
Right, strong, more or less an angel.
Yeah.
And you've got good angels, and you've got bad angels, and you've got powerful angels, and you've got less powerful angels. And Sauron is the most powerful of the currently extant angels. And you're right, Glorfindel would have stood out like a beacon.
Yeah, and the reason I use that example is that, to me, in our world, there are people like, so the average person, you can consider them like a hobbit, in which they think all these things don't exist. Some of them don't think they exist. Some of them think they do exist. Then you have the few hobbits like Bilbo and his ancestor of the old bull roarer Took that encountered and fought goblins, and Bilbo encountered Smaug, and when you get to like the conversations in the book with Sam's the old gaffer, they're like
Right.
kind of saying it's all bullshit.
Well, what he's saying is, hey, look, adventures make you late for your dinner. There's no real benefit to going on these adventures. Why would you ever
Right.
want to? Why would you ever want to leave the Shire?
Exactly. Exactly. That's the way that I put it. It's like
Yeah.
most people, we're going about our days, and then you have the few of us that for some specific circumstance, kind of like Frodo and Bilbo, they get exposed to the other realm,
Mm-hmm.
the realm in which the Nazgul exist in, and you see all these spirits and the oath breakers and all these different things. It's not like they asked for that to happen. It kind of just happened. And unfortunately, I know that's like a really crappy answer when someone asks, like, well, what if I want to see the paranormal? It's like, one, you kind of don't. And two, it's kind of just by chance. It's by luck of the draw. Unless you specifically go somewhere and do some sort of, to me, in my opinion, some sort of incantation or something like
You
that.
can definitely put yourself in danger.
Right,
When
right.
when I mean a trivial story. I was in high school. Uh look, I doubt if I was all that much different from you guys when I was in high school. I mean, I was a guy who had read 50 times as many books as most people there, was interested in all kinds of strange things.
Oh, good. You were a giant nerd too. That's
Uh,
exactly. You're right.
yeah, I was a giant nerd.
Except when you were a giant nerd back then, like nerds was a bad thing, and you got beat up by a bully. Like nerd. Nowadays, it's like cool to be a nerd.
Oh, really? I never knew it'd get cool to be a nerd. Believe me, I never knew that. Anyway, I'm at a party, and there are all these young girls. Say they're 16, 15. Giggly, you know, vapid little girls. Well, look, I'm sorry, I'm 15, 16. I'm thinking, gosh, I like hanging around these giggly, vapid girls. They're pretty. That was where I was. And so they were at a party doing, I don't know, it wasn't a Ouija board, but it was like tarot cards or, some kind of ghostly, supernatural kind of game. And so they say things like, well, I wonder what the rules are. And in the jillion books I had read about the rules. I said, oh, I know what the rules are. And suddenly they're very, very impressed it's an in. Okay. It's a way for me to be around these beautiful girls. Well, that was fun for a little while until one girl stands up, starts pulling her hair and just screaming and then pointing up in the air and saying, it's the devil. He's here to kill me. It's the devil. And she's not joking. This is not a girl who's doing something to get attention. She was terrified. And so this entire situation put her in a position where she was certain that she was being attacked supernaturally. And so I suddenly feel very, very guilty because I've put this young girl in a situation where she feels herself to be vulnerable. Now, I could rationalize that and say, hey, she just built that in her mind. Or maybe she really was being attacked. Because I know the attack is possible.
So, Vic, the final question of the evening, and thank you so much for your time in these stories. We really appreciate it. So, our final question for you is, why do you think people deny the existence of the paranormal, especially when some people have directly experienced it, but still like to pretend it does not exist?
Well, then you break people down into multiple categories. First category we've talked about, the older gaffer. He doesn't care. He's got a world that's comfortable, nurturing to him, and he wants to maintain that. And I can't blame him, nor can I blame the people who do that here. And that is the majority of people. Now, there's a little bit of a paradox in that most people kind of enjoy watching the ghost hunter shows or the Bigfoot shows, but to them it's just kind of a thrill. Yes, I can have this little thrill for 20 minutes and then go off and make dinner. I don't have to worry about this anymore. So there's that. But I think that most, and I don't, man, this is going to sound arrogant. I don't think most people's minds can comfortably exist in multiple worlds at one time. So for instance, I'm a Catholic, you're a Catholic. Okay. I mean, if you are a Catholic, and a genuine Catholic, you are immediately accepting the possibility of the supernatural. When you go to receive the Eucharist, you are not, if you are following the thoughts of Catholicism, the tenets of Catholicism, you are not simply eating a wafer. You're receiving the blood or the body of Christ. So that's a supernatural act. Now, many people want to stop there. But in Catholicism, you have exorcism, you have demons, you have an overarching evil entity, you have lesser evil entities, all of whom interact with the world. But that's frightening, and people don't want to deal with that. I don't know. I'm trying to think if I know anyone who has experienced something supernatural or paranormal and then still continues to deny what they've seen. I'm sure if I think about it, I probably have. But my feeling is those people don't bring it up in conversation. They don't talk about that. But my assumption would be, well, okay, just let's take it back to a real world mundane example. Once had a cat. His name was Armand. Big, beautiful, fluffy cat. We take Armand to have him neutered. He comes back home. He's kind of pissed off that he'd been at the vet. But in the next week, we start seeing that he's behaving like a male cat. He's going around, he's spraying, he's real aggressive. He's behaving like a male cat. I tell my wife, I don't think Armand got fully neutered. And she just refused. Nope, he's neutered. He's fine. There's nothing wrong with him. Everything's fine. After about a month, it's like, let's take him back to the vet. Turns out he had 2 additional testicles. So he was a polyorchid cat.
I've never heard of that. That's a first.
So he had 4 testicles. Okay, they'd take those out and everything's fine. But I would ask my wife at the time, why didn't you believe me when I said that he's still a male cat? And she was very honest. She said, I just didn't want to believe you because that complicated her world. And I don't say that in a condemnatory kind of fashion. I just say that is that most people don't want to have their world complicated. That kind of sounds like a cop-out answer, but what do you think?
I think what's interesting is there might be more. I totally agree with you, by the way. I think that that's really what's going on for the most part, because I have people in my immediate family who are like that. For most of my youth, I, like you guys, was a very deep thinker and always had a bunch of questions that kind of organically sprung from philosophy or theology or whatever, study of religion. Like I just always was fascinated by that sort of thing. But what's interesting is those same people who weren't ready to have like a metaphysical philosophical discussion were just as readily open to accepting, like talking about Bigfoot, the mystery of Bigfoot, or the mystery of UFOs, or but not if they want to see UFOs, but they want to see it from 1,000 miles away, sort of thing. So it's it's, you could still hold on to that tangible idea that they're going to be safe experiencing, like you said, that air of excitement, but from a distance. But isn't it interesting that when you start talking about philosophy and life and existence, that is immediately in your face, because it's literally walking up to the veil and trying to peek through it. And the other side of the veil is fear of unknown and all that stuff. And that really pushes people away, I think. So I think what's equally interesting is, why do we exist? Why do us three knuckleheads?
Oh, well, yeah, that's every bit as interesting.
Yeah. So
have you ever,
oh, go ahead. Yeah.
In all of your nerddom, have you read The Varieties of a Religious Experience by William James?
Some passages. Yeah, I've heard of that.
Okay. It's worth your time. It talks a lot about, first off, what people experience when they become aware of the parts of existence that aren't part of physical causality. It's a great book, and it kind of answers some of those questions. Gentlemen, I've really enjoyed talking to you about these things, and now my feeling of oppression when I talk about these events is kind of going away, but I sure hope I was an asset to your show.
Oh, absolutely. We loved having you on. We're going to
every time, man.
We're going to have to bring you back for a part 2, because there's a whole plethora of questions.
Well, you know where I am.
Absolutely, that we didn't get to.
Yeah, I want to talk about the unforgivable. What I've been spending most of my time thinking about was the unforgivable sin question. That's a really, really important question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did want to ask that, but
we'll get to it.
Your stories were so captivating and really interesting and gave me the goosebumps.
Give
So,
you the goosebumps. Well,
yeah, I do hope the listeners enjoy them
I'm
before
in the
we.
gaffer category right now, where it's like, you know, keep my tea hot and my life simple,
That's a fair category to be in.
and my pipeweed plentiful. All right.
But Vic, where can the listeners find you?
Well, you can contact Trailer Trash Terrors at trailertrashterrors@gmail.com. I've been putting off building a webpage uh, for a long time now, just because I haven't wanted to tackle it. But soon there will be a trailertrashterrors.com webpage. I'm not part of TikTok. I'm not part of Instagram. There is a Facebook page out there that I rarely go to. So the goal was that when I get to 120 episodes, then I will take a break and I will spend the time necessary to get all that social media stuff set up, uh, which I really find irritating. But 120 episodes is enough for people to listen to for days and days on end if they want to.
You heard him, folks. Go give his show a follow and a listen. We were on there just recently, a few episodes back. So if you enjoyed this conversation, go listen to Trailer Trash Terrors. Also tune in to the Paranormal Rundown, where Vic and a few other hosts talk about a plethora of topics, really interesting topics.
2,765 now.
And it just keeps growing. Just keeps growing. Thank you for tuning into today's episode of The Wandering Road. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a rating on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please share the show with your friends, as that would help us grow immensely. Also be sure to follow us on social media. You can find us on TikTok at twroadpodcast, our Instagram at twroadpodcast, and our Facebook by searching for The Wandering Road Podcast. If you'd like to get a hold of us, you can reach us at our email address, twroadpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. We would love to have you on the show as a guest so you can share your stories, or you could submit email submissions of your stories that we could dedicate an episode to. Thanks, and we'll catch you on the next one.